Well, now, you were appointed to the job of sheriff, as you said, in '68, and then you immediately have to run for election. You win.
Right.
You got a 4-year term in front of you.
Right.
But you didn't serve all 4 years by a long shot. What happened next?
Well, in '69, now, Jerry Kavanaugh had been mayor, and he decided for 8 years, he decided not to run again. So it was an open spot. And I wanted Jim Brickley to run for it, and Jim considered, because he had been city councilman for a while.
Right.
And he was happy with with working with Bill Cahalan, so he decided not to. And others that I've thought, and finally somebody said, "Why don't you try it? You've got good ink." And we flew out some teasers, and the results were positive, and so we had a slam bang primary in '69. And
well, let me back up just a little bit, though. I mean, before you had to run for sheriff as an incumbent, after you were appointed, and so you were the incumbent, the only other time you'd run for office before was that 1964 race for judgeship, which you lost. So this is the first, or I should say the second time you've really run for public office, and it's an incredibly tumultuous time. The riots had just occurred a year and a half before. What was in your mind running for office at this point, having run one losing race? This must have been daunting. The riot had just been a year and a half before. I mean, the city was in really
turmoil.
Turmoil, a lot of tension. It was a huge, huge challenge. Who else ran against you? How many people?
Well, the one that was not, there were two nominated in the primary, myself and Dick Austin.
Yeah, and Austin's position at that time was what?
Auditor general.
He was the auditor.
Auditor for Wayne County Auditor,
he
one
was
of
Wayne
three.
County Auditor.
He was a CPA. He's a very qualified accountant.
Right. Had he been elected? Was that an elected position, Wayne County Auditor, or was it appointed?
It's elected.
So you think?
I'm not sure.
So, but I mean, he had an electoral base then. In other words, countywide.
Oh, sure.
So he and you. Did anybody else of consequence run in that race?
Yes, Mary Beck did.
Oh, Mary Beck.
She was on the city council.
Woman, yes.
And the president of the city council, not Nessel, I forget.
Yeah, I'm trying to think who that would have been at that time.
And there were several others, but the two nominees were myself and Dick Austin.
You finished 1-2.
Right.
Did you finish first in the primary?
I was slightly ahead.
Slightly ahead of Austin.
Right.
Okay, so then you're in a race.
Let me correct that. No, he was slightly ahead of me.
He was ahead of you in the primary.
In the primary.
In the primary. You came in second, so the top two go on to November.
Right.
And you've got a city that's precariously balanced racially, right? Isn't it about...
It was about 45-55, 45 black and 55% white when 1969 and 70 when I really took office. The election is in the fall of '69.
Right. So what was that campaign like? Did you and Dick Austin debate? What kind of a campaign was it? 8 times?
On TV.
Wow.
In fact, 247 had us for a half hour each. And then Channel 50 had us for 3 or 4 different debates for an hour each. I must say that Dick was an honorable guy. And pressure was obvious to everybody. And because he, in addition to him being black, aside from that, the racial matters are in everybody's memory because of, $50 million of damage in the city of Detroit in a riot in 1967.
Right.
And people killed. There were about 40 people that were killed during the riot.
Right.
And the tension was very evident. So I said to my staff, we're not going to talk about race per se. We're going to talk about the merits. And Dick Austin said the same thing. We both agreed that we're going to talk about our backgrounds, our plans, and let's not talk about racial tensions other than something that will help the community to grow.
Right.
And he kept his word, and I did. And I was, they were trying to label me a law and order, and I said, no, I'm a law and justice man.
That's good. Yep, that's right.
I had that time, I had been sheriff. Now, aside from the racial matters, which were the number one issue, number 2 was crime. And because of my background as sheriff and with the prosecutor's office for almost 8 years, in trying criminal matters. I had an up on him on the criminal anti-crime sentiment of the people, and so I won the race, but very close. We had about 460,000 votes, and I won by 7,242 votes.
Right. I think there was a Detroit News article kind of talking about the close race. Afterwards, a picture of you on the cover with your team of people around you, Jerry Tanyan, Bill Lucas, all these other people, talking about how it looked like you were maybe comfortably ahead, maybe 6 or 8 points with time beginning to run out, and all of a sudden it looked like it was closing. What was going on there? Why did it close, and what did you do?
Oh, it's awfully.
Get over the top?
We had to be very careful in what we were espousing and planning and bringing the people together. And so you had to be very careful in the words that you used, and to make sure. I know one of the things that happened, that some of Dick Austin's people had an ad in the paper the week before the Tuesday election, the weekend before that, and it was rather espousing his election, but rather racial in tone. Mm-hmm. And that we had a negative reaction in the community about that. So that impacted.
You think that maybe backfired against him?
I think it did.
Yeah.
And then so it was touch and go when you win by 7,000 out of 450,000.
I'll say absolutely. Well, let me ask you this: do you remember how much you raised and spent in that campaign?
Yes,
just by contrast with
between
today?
the two, we spent about $250,000.
Wow.
Yeah, we raised about 100,000 for the primary, and then another about 150,000 for the general election. And
were there any real major issues? I mean, other than the racial issue, which, as you said, you didn't really even want to talk about and didn't talk about, and it was off to the side. It may have been under the radar, and crime was obviously something. But I mean, did Dick Austin, for instance, have a different approach to what he thought the crime problem was, or the solutions to it?
Not really. No, both of us were for economic growth, and before I forget, I want to remind you that Dick Austin, a couple of years later, became Secretary of State for the state of Michigan,
right,
and served in that capacity for about 15 years till he passed away on the job.
Yeah.
Maybe more than that.
Well, he served 24 years.
24.
But he didn't pass away on the job. He finally got defeated.
That's
yeah,
right.
by
yes.
Candace Miller. All right, you won this cliffhanger of a race for mayor of Detroit in November of 1969. You find yourself presented with an enormous challenge. Did you meet pretty much all the goals you set for yourself, or not?
Met a lot. We had most of them. Whether we talked about little city halls, a new concept of bringing downtown to the neighborhood, and I patterned that after Boston. Mayor White did that in Boston, and I went there to visit him during the campaign to see how they organized it, and it was successful there. And I said, we're going to do it in Detroit, and we did implement it. We had about 12 or so when I left office. Crime was number one. Safety on the streets was important. This is all after the riots, so you can see that. So we had then about 4,200 policemen, and I said we had to get a lot more. And I had to find a police commissioner that would serve the city well under those very tense circumstances. So I did a national search, and Pat Murphy had been head of the police foundation in Washington, D.C., but he came from a high ranking as a police officer in New York, went to Rochester, New York, city of Rochester in New York as police chief. Then he was police chief in Washington, D.C. for a while. Then he became president of the Police Foundation, which was a national organization with a lot of distributing grant money. And I found out when my headhunters that he would rather get back into police work. So I interviewed him, offered him a job, and he came.